Back in 2005, Apple made the transition from IBM PowerPC processors to the Intel chipset for all their future computers. And what this brought for Apple was a new generation of desktop and notebook computers. This year, Apple made the official announcement of their new line of in-house processors that will be finding their way into future Mac computers. They call the new chip M1. And to say that these will lead to substantial changes in the future of Apple desktop and laptop computers would be a complete understatement. It may sound like hyperbole, but throughout this video, I intend to detail out why this could very well be a massive leap forward for what future versions of Apple computers will be able to do. I'll be going down the list of what we know, what we have recently found out, and what could be next for Apple and the M-series chips. I'm Connor Mitchell, and you're watching Dragon Rider Network's take on the Apple M1 processors and why they will change everything we come to expect from our computers. Let's get into it. A little over 10 years ago, Apple launched a completely new product called the iPad. On the outside, it just looked like a stretched out version of the iPhone that we had already seen for nearly 4 years. But on the inside was a change that would come to define the iPad when it came to performance and what mobile devices could be capable of. In partnership with Samsung, Apple had designed an in-house processor for the iPad which they called A4. Before this, Samsung was the primary chip maker that Apple sought for early iPhones and the iPod Touch. But Apple was betting on the iPad being a bridge between their line of iPhones and their line of notebook computers. This is where the decision of going to the A4 came into play. As was the change when Apple transitioned from the PowerPC to Intel in 2005, the reason for this investment in their in-house chips comes not only for performance, but for performance per watt, the energy efficiency of the processors themselves. In a portable device like the iPad, battery life would prove to be more important than almost any product Apple had ever released. And the new A-series chips, which were running on ARM architecture, had the energy efficiency to help the battery on the iPad last, but also had the performance to back it up. 10 years later, we have seen generation after generation of these chips become, as Apple has shown, almost exponentially more powerful, adding more cores, being more energy efficient, and even introducing dedicated processing units for graphics, wireless technologies, and even encrypting your fingerprint data. But what does all this mean in terms of the Mac? When Apple announced that the Mac would be receiving a brain transplant to their own in-house M-series chips, a lot of people wondered what kind of change this could bring to the Mac. If the power for iPads and iPhones over the years had exponentially grown, could this mean a new generation of Macs could be even more powerful and energy efficient than ever before? Since 2 weeks ago, we have learned far more about the transition of these processors than we did through months and even years of speculation. We learned that 3 Macs, the MacBook Air, the MacBook Pro, and the Mac Mini, would receive the first upgrades. In the last 2 weeks since Apple introduced the first line of M-series Macs and gave us the numbers in regards to the performance and efficiency increases, the tech community has been split. Some were saying this was going to bring a big leap in performance over the existing line of Macs and many other computers on the market. Apple was putting forward the claim that the CPU performance would be 3.5 times better and graphics performance would be 6 times better than existing Macs. On the other hand, many were saying that this was quite overhyped and Apple didn't exactly give us the numbers to back up their claims. This week, after the embargo was lifted and all reviewers could unveil their findings, the jury is in. And, to the surprise of many, the new Macs running on the new chip proved to be more powerful than most had expected. Going strictly by the numbers on MKBHD's Geekbench test, which was optimized for the M1 processor, single-core performance on the M1 MacBook Pro beat out every Intel Mac ever made, and multi-core scored almost on par with an 8-core iMac Pro. Now, benchmarks don't mean everything, but they give a pretty good numerical placement for what kind of performance you could expect from most real-life applications. And for those who have seen these new Macs firsthand, this has held true. It's held true for processing performance, and it's held true for energy efficiency. And look, I'll admit, it's a little weird for Apple to be advertising battery life on the Mac the same way they do for iPhones and iPads. But it makes sense considering it's what the majority of people use them for. And aside from bringing changes to performance and energy consumption, this would also bring changes on how apps would run on these new processors. Just like the Intel switch from PowerPC, there are compatibility issues with apps that were designed for Intel but are now supposed to run on this completely different processor. This is where Rosetta 2 comes into play. Rosetta is a layer of code within macOS that allows non-optimized apps to run seamlessly on the Apple M series chips. It's more power efficient than an emulator, meaning it still allows you decent battery life, and, according to the early reviews, it also does a great job at preventing a performance bottleneck. And this is what has piqued the interest in what will happen once these apps are optimized. Optimization is going to account for everything going forward. What this change has proved is that hardware that looks good on paper no longer holds a decisive advantage anymore. Having a faster clock speed, more memory in your graphics card, or anything else that might have traditionally have promised higher speeds is slowly becoming more irrelevant. The best way I could explain it is by having you imagine you were living in a really big apartment with just the basic stuff you need thrown around in different parts of the apartment. The basic stuff in this analogy would be the cores of the CPU, the GPU, and even the system memory itself. Now, if you were to go to a much smaller apartment, but be able to find similar stuff that works just as well, you are optimizing the resources you have. I guess in this analogy, the space of the apartment is the software, or something. I really don't know where this analogy was going. But getting back on topic. Apple has shown us through optimization of their software and hardware, they could turn a laptop like the MacBook Air that, 12 years ago, was honestly just a few steps above a netbook in terms of processing power. Now it's running benchmark tests that are putting almost every other Intel Mac on the market to shame. So, if Apple could show this kind of performance increase with the MacBook Air, imagine what they could do if they went all out with these processors in a next generation Mac Pro. If they're able to nearly match the performance of high-end desktops in just one of their chips on the MacBook Pro, imagine the power if they fit one of their high-end Macs with two of these chips. We're talking about a complete shift in the kind of computing power that is being brought into our homes. Devices like the iPhone and iPad brought desktop performance into mobile devices, but the M series chips will bring that kind of jump in power to our desktop and laptop machines. For the first time in a while, I am very excited about the future of computers and what they will be capable of. Apple has taken the first step into a new generation of computing, and we all find ourselves, myself included, eagerly awaiting for the next step.